Hello and welcome to Bastionland Broadcasting, where tonight we are continuing our deep dive into Mythic Bastionland. My name is Chris McDowell. If you're tuning in for the first time, I designed this game, and tonight we're going to be talking about the myths in Mythic Bastionland. If you've not seen the previous parts, I'm going to try and be swift tonight because last when we started looking through all the nights, I was overconfident that I could get through them in one sitting. Tonight, I am going to try and get through all of the myths in one sitting. So I'm going to glaze over some of them more briefly than others. We are going to first of all just talk a little bit about like where these myths come from. I did talk about the mechanics of how myths work in the first episode of this series, where I talked about the rules of the game. But in terms of like inspirations for these myths, obviously they're a pretty core part of the game. They are the things that your knights are out exploring. I'm not going to be able to answer every question. I can see Scott MacArthur got a question in very early though, and asked, do knights know which myths they're supposed to be seeking? And I would say no. In my games, they do not, and that's part of the mystery, is trying to work out what's going on. And they might find it out pretty early, especially if they speak to a seer, but generally they don't know ahead of time what myths they're encountering. Right. We're gonna speed things up. It's gonna be a pacey one tonight. When I'm still doing this after 2 hours, you can remind me of my hubris. So, sources of these myths. As I mentioned with the knights, I didn't want to have a sort of direct parallel for things that are in existing mythology, and specifically in existing Arthurian mythology. But I did want to tap into some of the feel of the way some of those, some of the like supernatural and weird elements of those worlds, how they feel, rather than putting something that is a very obvious reference to the source material. A few of the places that I really enjoyed digging around for source material. Anything that is like an animal, so like the lion is the one that springs to mind. Medieval bestiaries are awesome. This one is a fantastic translation, obviously, of a very old bestiary, and a lot of the weird behaviors and restrictions of animals comes from these. Not necessarily taking, some of them are directly pulled from here, but some of them are also just like taking them to twisting them just enough to be a little bit less recognizable from the source material. The other big source that I used, obviously I wanted to dig around into like mythologies of, Northern Europe and Britain, but also kind of digging around a little bit into other things while having a more consistent tone. And a really good source for that is these Time Life Enchanted World books, which I'd originally planned to pick up just a few of these secondhand. These are like an old book series. I want to say early 90s they were published originally, and it was not too difficult to get them secondhand. And they're just filled with like awesome like artwork, awesome stories. So this one is dragons, and all the artwork is like old pieces of art that they've presumably either licensed or are in public domain. And there's like 20 odd of them. The entire, hang on, let me I started by, I thought I'm just going to buy 3 or 4 for this project because they seem cool. You can see my bottom shelf of this bookshelf is entirely now taken up by these Time Life books, and I ended up with a full set because they were so cheap to get secondhand. These are really cool because they're written for my age level. They're written for children, my reading level, I should say. They're written, I don't know if they are written for children, but they're certainly written for the family reader, I guess, that you should maybe have these in your house. Those are really cool. Check those out. And we're already diverting too much. We're going to jump over to talk about the myths. Now, before we talk about the myths, I do need to say that as we go through, I've been praising the artwork of Alex Sorensen as we go through this. The artwork for Mythic Bastionland has been nominated for an Emmy Award. It's not this piece, it's the interior art category, we have been nominated. I say we, Alec, did the artwork. So if you like this, when the voting for the Ennies goes up, go and vote for Mythic Bastionland in Best Interior Art. It is also in there for Best Layout and Design and for Product of the Year. So vote for those as well. But I'm less comfortable asking you to do that. I'm much more comfortable praising Alec and getting you to vote for him. So let's do it. We've got 72 myths. Now, I saw someone asking in the Discord, apologies for forgetting your name. Someone was asking, like, shall I watch this stream if I'm worried about spoilers because I'm going to be playing in this game? I am going to be talking about these myths, and for some of them I will. I'm not going to sit here and read all of the omens out one by one, but I may refer to them. So it's up to you, really. There are going to be some spoilers if you're planning on playing in this campaign, but I'm not going to be going over it in super detail. So myth number 1 is the plague. Can you tell this game was written originally in 2020? Did I start writing this? 2021? Yeah, this was it's kind of very telling that this ended up being the first myth that I wrote. So as you can tell, we'll do this first one in a bit more detail, and then I will go over the other myths in a bit of a swifter approach. So every myth has a name, it has a poem, it has a fantastic piece of award-nominated artwork, just to remind you there. And then we have the 6 omens that are going to happen in order. Now, in an early version of this system, the omens did not necessarily happen in order. There was a system where you rolled and you sort of encountered them at random, and you were sort of temporarily locked out of the final omen, but you might encounter them in a slightly out of sequence order. And early on, I realized it was so much better to have them sort of build like this. So if you are writing your own myths, which I would really encourage people to do, because there's a lot in the book, but it's just a lot of fun to write. They were less fun when I was writing like number 70 and 71. That I'd probably had enough at that point. But if you've not written any of these, they're really fun to write, because all you need to do is think of something cool, write 6 things that happen in a row, come up with, think about who's the cast of this story. There's usually some kind of threat, and come up with a little table related to one of these things. So I can thoroughly recommend it. So generally the omens will build up to some kind of conclusion, and I know that I've had a lot of questions, and I try to walk the line between not over explaining things, but also I do want to help people actually enjoy the game. I've had a lot of questions about, like, well, how do you do this? Because the prompts are quite short and that it relies a bit on improvisation. And that is true, but I think if you try it out, in my experience, I'm obviously biased because I wrote them, but in my experience, the prompt usually should hopefully give you enough to kind of get things started, and then you can kind of feedback off the players and see what they decide to do and think about how it fits in the world. And remember the whole mythic feel of this game, because, in fact, put a pin in that. We'll come back to this kind of mythic reality and how reality can shift around these myths when we get onto, I think, the next myth, actually. For now, let's just look at the plague. So we won't go through all of them in this much detail, but I wanted to just show how the omens sort of escalate. So remember, you're going to encounter these omens as you are out exploring the wilderness. You are more likely to encounter the next omen from your nearest myth, but you can encounter omens from other myths as well. So you're never quite sure which myth you're dealing with at any moment. And, it might start off with an old coot proclaims their dreams, where foul air was choking people in their sleep, pleads for help spreading the word. So, this is kind of more obviously to do with some kind of plague, and things usually start off quite mundane and just kind of almost like a warning, an omen in the classic sense, I guess. So they usually start off quite tame and mundane like this, which means that sometimes that first session, if you end up just getting a few of the omen number 1 from each different myth, it can feel like a bit of a slow burn to start things off. But again, I don't mind that, because you're already exploring the realm. You're just getting used to things. It can actually be quite nice to have that being eased into the really climactic stuff that comes in the later omens. So number 2, moaning in the mist, an ivy-cloaked shack home to a dying old couple. Their daughter left to search for treatment. And again, usually when something like this comes up, it will point to... No, you know what? It will often point to someone. So the Jolly Hunter gets pointed to the cast. We don't get anything for these old couple. So this is where you might think, well, how do I play this old couple, because I don't even have names, I don't have anything like that. And remember, this book has at the bottom of every night page a bunch of stuff. So one of the old people, their name is Sonara. They have a thunderous voice, which, you know, you might think thunderous voice for like an old person that's dying of plague, that's weird. But weird is good, because it gets you acting things out differently than you might just, you know, it's easy to think, well, this is a sick old person, they're going to be frail, they're going to be super, like, they're going to sound like they're dying, and I find I would just like fall into the cliche. Having an old person with a thunderous voice, and state could be feasting, so maybe they're not sort of maybe they've got like a ravenous appetite from this illness. And the theme could be sleep. So maybe one of them is deep in a sleep. So those prompts are there to help fill those gaps. And they are a core part of the experience for me. They're not just there as a little afterthought. That is like the world. Okay, number 3. A Jolly Hunter and his son, with mild symptoms, chasing a smiling fox up a tree. They don't believe in the plague, but claim the fox is a harbinger of death. The smiling fox wants to witness a death. So again, this is another little example of how animals, I like having animals that are, it's kind of left for interpretation as to how intelligent animals are, but I like it when they act the way that they're portrayed in these bestiaries. And sometimes they act like fairy tale animals, where they're, you know, borderline human intelligence. Sometimes they just have weird behaviors. So this fox just wants to witness a death, and that's what this fox wants to do. I can see some questions coming in. I am going to try to address them as I go, but it's going to be tough, because I want to let me get some momentum going on these myths, and then I'll come back for some questions. Omen number 4, a self-important knight and 2 squires returning to report the plague to the seat of power. Demands escort from other knights. They carry a grey lantern, its light only visible to the character. So again, we don't get anything more on this knight here. We just get that they are a self-important knight. So again, I would flick to the next knight, and, you know, you could just say that, well, they're the snare knight, or you could just use these characteristics and state and theme to come up with your own kind of knight on the fly. So yeah, you do need to improvise, because there's a lot of stuff. Like one page implies a lot of events that I didn't want to cover in excruciating detail, but hopefully you've got the tools there to do that. I can see a very valid question, actually. Udi Kumara says, should you be letting players know if they have rolled an omen? If they make a wilderness roll, they'd know it's an omen, right? Now, it's a very good point, because I normally advocate for making all of your rolls in public. So even as the referee, roll it out in the open. But if you do that, if players know how the wilderness roll works, they will know that they are encountering their nearest omen, or a random omen, or a landmark. So I like to do that roll in secret, because then when they come across, like to use this second example of that they come across this moaning in the mist and an ivy cloaked shack, and they can just hear moaning coming from this shack. They don't know whether this is to do with a myth. They don't know whether this is just a dwelling. They don't know whether this is like a seer in their sanctum. That mystery to me is really fun to play with. So no, I would not tell that. I would do that roll in secret. It's one of the very, very few rolls that I would do in secret away from the players. Number 5, a clearing, bonfire embers. An infected crowd close to death, full of anger. They swear a blood oath on a stump of a red oak, seeing visions of revenge. They attack any caught watching. So this early on, this shows a theme that I really wanted to do with this game, which was that knights do have abilities that kind of border on magic, and seers have obviously great kind of powers within quite tight restrictions. But I really wanted to have magic in the world. So there's lots of these little locations, like they're swearing a blood oath on the stump of a red oak. And I haven't said, oh, and when you swear on a red oak, it's like enforced by magic, but it obviously means something to these people. And whether or not that is actually reflected in anything mechanically is left a little bit open. But I really wanted to try and get that feeling of there is magic in the world and in nature, more so than there being magic in your characters. And finally, an infected village, the root of the plague. All are visibly infected. 2 purging knights charging to cleanse with flame. So this is our kind of conclusion. And one way or another, by the time you've resolved this encounter, you're going to say that the plague is likely to be resolved. But here's the thing. If the village gets burned down, then that is a resolution to the story, whether or not it actually solved the plague problem itself. The way that I consider whether or not the myth has been resolved is if it feels like the end of the story as is, which may mean that it's going to turn into something different. But if it feels like the end of that book in the story, if that makes sense, then I think that is completed. You can have lasting consequences from the myth. It may be that the plague now spreads across the realm, but the plague myth, like the story of the plague, has finished. So we know how the plague reached the point that it is at the end. That made very little sense. But I do try and think of it in terms of stories. Have you reached some kind of end of a story, even if the consequences of that story lead to another story happening? And as a rule of thumb, after this 6th omen is completed, I would say the myth is resolved one way or another, usually. Even if it's a complete failure from the knight's point of view, it could still be resolved and they would still get the glory, because the glory isn't really about, did you solve the problem? The glory is about, will you be remembered in the story of the plague in this case? Even if you were completely inept, if you're in the story, you get some glory. It's such a good rule that it rhymes. So yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more if I notice any more omens that are especially tricky to resolve the end of. And then each has this little spark table as well. And initially, these were just going to be spark tables that were related to the myth, but not necessarily restricted to that myth. So here you can see that the deathly malady, this could be any illness. If you just needed like one of your characters, an NPC, to be ill, you could just roll on here and get a symptom and transmission, and that's the illness that they've got. And to start with, they do start off a little bit more generic, and then as I started writing more of them, they became more specific. So you can kind of see them being written. They weren't written strictly in order, but I certainly wrote the first 12 first, and then I wrote the second 12 second, and after that I did jump around a little bit. So there we go. It only took us 18 minutes to do one myth, so we've just got 71 more to go. The wall. Now it's interesting. This is second because this is one that has caused some amount of grief for people running the game, because it's one of those myths where it raises the question of, well, we went into a hex and we passed through it and we didn't encounter anything. And then we came back from our journey, and on the way back, we hit an omen of the wall, and it says there's a wall across this hex and it doesn't look like it's been freshly built. And this is, there's a line somewhere else in the rules that says about how reality will shift to make the myths real, because the knights going out and exploring the realm is almost what's causing the myths to manifest. It's not explained, but there's the general implication that the seers want the knights to go out and make the myths happen, and they want to help them resolve it one way or another. And the myths want these myths to, the seers want the myths to happen. The knights make the myths happen, and in the process of resolving the myths, knights will eventually get enough glory to go on the city quest and find the city. That's about the extent of it. It's not thought out in much more detail than that. But that is kind of the implication of what's going on in this reality. So yes, reality can bend to have a wall be there that maybe you didn't see it before, or maybe it's literally there and there's no way it could have been here before. But this myth is becoming true. And it's kind of, I suggest, again, just roll with it and trust it, and players will realize that this world does work slightly differently when it comes to the myths, you can still have those grounded elements in the holdings where like this castle's not just going to vanish, but weird things are going to crop up as you explore the wilderness. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but again, we've had one myth that was kind of an event, I guess. We have another one that is like a place, and then the third one, I think. So this is another weird one where it is kind of the creature, but killing the shadow is not necessarily your goal here. There's more of like a story happening with the sorrowful knight. So it was interesting writing them because you've got a lot of flexibility when you're writing all the knights. Like you're always essentially designing a player character, and writing the seers, you've got a lot of flexibility, but the seers all fulfill a certain role. With the myths, I did try and like make lots of different types of myths. So some of them are more event-based, some of them are more like, here's a big monster to deal with, and some of them are just kind of a story that happens. And in the book, it says to like roll them randomly and choose. Sorry, roll them randomly rather than choosing when you're choosing which myths to use in your realm. I would encourage a little bit of curation if you're running your game. Rolling is a good place to start, but then maybe flick through and see, well, do I like these 6? Do I feel like it fits what I'm going for? Are there any myths that really speak to me? And I think choosing your like menu of myths is really going to affect how the game plays. Okay, so the shadow. I like the mournful forms. I like anything that has like a weird shape, and rolling on the spot table is going to give you its weird shape. The river is another one like the wall that is sort of like geography is shifting to fit the myth. And I think this is one of the first pieces of myth art that I had through from Alec. So again, you can see this riverboats table was originally meant to be a more generic, like if you're on any river, you can roll here to see who's going down the river. And you can still do that. So if you're not using myths, it's worth flicking through to look if any of these little tables are going to be useful for you. The Wyvern is a really good, I would say it's almost like the simplest myth, and it's a really good starter myth because it's just one horrible monster and some stuff that happens related to that monster, and the implication is you should probably try and kill this thing or at least drive it away. So I always kind of point players to this if they're unsure for like their first game which one to use. I think this is a really solid one. I do also like the forms of its poisonous young is a really fun table to roll on. So you end up with like a newt with twin tails is one of the young, and the other young is a swan with an unhinged jaw. And again, I tried to use animals that... So dragons are not especially, like, the taxonomy of dragons in like mythology is quite muddy. Funnily enough, in that dragons book, the Time Life Dragons book, there is a very clear taxonomy of the difference between like a wyvern and a lindworm and lots of other types of dragon. But here I tried to pull from animals that I'd seen in descriptions of dragons, other than just being a big lizard, because I like the idea of like a weaselly dragon or like a swan-like dragon. Someone's asking what is the city, and that's kind of the whole question of being a knight. So you have to be a knight and go out and get enough glory to discover that. My serious answer is that it's left very vague, but it's if you read the city quest spread, assuming you're not a player, but if you read the city quest spread as a referee, that kind of talks about what the city could be. The goblin is another really fun one. So remember, the origin of this game was following on an idea that is not originally by me. I've seen lots of people talk about this, of what if you had an RPG setting where there was only one of each creature. So there is one dragon and there is one goblin. So I thought, well, goblins feel... I still love goblins, but they've become something quite... I can't quite think of the word. They're quite overplayed. I hesitate to say overplayed because they're still a lot of fun. But goblins have become this kind of they don't feel very fantastical. They feel incredibly mundane when you see people talk about goblins in D&D. So I was like, well, what would be like the goblin? What if he was like a single entity? And that's how he ended up as this kind of what's he called? The Lord of all lost things. Their cleverness, the goblin, Lord of all lost things. I did also like giving them very grand titles to all of these creatures. The forest. Now, this is, even though this is a geographical one, this is a much more straightforward one because it's easy to just say, oh yeah, you missed that. There is some forest in this place. Maybe if I was running like a desert realm, the forest could be, you'd have to make it a bit more weird and dreamy. But the forest is great. I am going to spoil one of the later omens here. I really like the part where you can end up traveling through the forest. You end up in a distant forest hex. And part of the reason why, one of the original reasons why I went for like a 12 by 12 grid for the recommended size of a realm was that you could roll 2d12 and get a random hex. And there are a couple of myths early on, especially that refer to like getting moved to like a random hex. But I really like the players getting like shunted across the map to somewhere and having to work out where they are. The child. So again, this is like this is an interesting one because there's not a very obvious finish to this. I won't go into all of the omens here because I do want to try and make it relatively spoiler free for players. But yeah, you have this idea of like a promised child, and the first sign of the child is usually pretty good. Milk to honey. I say that I like honey, but would I want all of my milk to be honey? And then the second sign of the child's coming is something horrible, like harvest of snakes, burning graves. So and then you know it kind of all becomes very strange and horrible. This is a fun one to throw in there, and it feels very weird and again it feels very weird and mythical. So I do like this one. The order. There were 6 in the circle, no first among them. Each a knight and scholar, master and student. One of the few ones that doesn't rhyme. I tried to break out of the pattern of having that that specific pattern with a rhyme, so some of them don't rhyme. The order is I like the order because I feel like these scholar knights. I've run this one a couple of times and they're really fun to play because it's easy to make like a knight that the player knights really hate, and yeah, they're just kind of like they're rude to people and they treat the vassals badly, and it's easy to just make them really hateable, I think. Right, I'm going to get to number 12 and then I'm going to quickly glance at questions, so apologies if I missed them. So the dead. This is another good straightforward myth to sort of start with. So if you're not already familiar, the first 12 myths and knights are included in the free quick start version. So I wanted to make sure there was a bit of variety within those 12. And the dead is one of the more straightforward, here are some monsters kind of myths that emerges. We have another nice little feature that I'd like to put in, which is most of the animals will have more than one name. Because I can't remember the source. It would have been some bestiary somewhere where it would talk about animals and it would say they're like also known as this and this and this in different parts of the world or in different sort of dialects. So animals do have names. So the great red vulture is also known as grizzlebird. And there's one example where individual animals have names, but I'm hoping that one makes a bit more sense. And I like to give animals like something a little bit supernatural. So burned and ground feathers are known to charm vermin into obedience. So even though this is kind of just an animal, there is something kind of magical about them. The underworld. I think this is another one where. Oh, so this is one of the ones that has a finish that doesn't just push you out into another part of the realm. This one pushes you out into a distant realm, which is that's a little bit. If I were a GM and I got that without having planned a second realm, I might feel a bit hard done by, because then I have to go and create another realm. I will not blame anyone that wants to house rule that into. They come out in a different part of the realm, or you just sort of hand wave their journey back, and do a time skip to represent that. So yeah, this is nice. And someone asked before about knights. The fact that there are knights in here that are not specific named knights. Well, I mean, they have names, but they are just known as a knight, or in this case, a lost knight. Hopefully carries the idea that the knights that are in the book are not the only ones, that you do have sort of more mundane knights in the world as well. And the worm, I really like the worm. Again, he's really just horrible, and especially he's kind of meant to be like a representation of greed, but I just love that the worm behavior table. I'm not gonna name names. Reminds me of certain people I've known. Not one person in particular, but just like certain behaviors that you might see in toxic people. What they will do in conversation, and then how that carries through to combat. But yeah, these list of 6 behaviors here, it's a good list of like things to not do, really. So yeah, you got some really horrible behaviors of the worm. Right, we'll dive into some questions quickly. I'm not going to I can't go too far back. I'm just going to glance down here. Chris, do you show your map to the players, or should they draw their own map as they progress? Dropping them outside the boundary of their travels would be so much more fun. If you have a way of doing that easily, I think that is a lot of fun. I usually just put the map out in front of the players because I quite like it as a focal point for the game, and it's a very immediate, especially if you're playing with new players. It's a very immediate thing of like, well, you put the piece down here, and where are you going? Which way do you want to go? But I won't have all the details on the map. They'll have like a sort of much more simplified version of the map. I have done it before where I've printed the map and then chopped it up into like quarters, and you kind of uncover each quarter as you go there. And as you are given the diegetic map of that part of the realm by going to the holding that's there. So it's really up to you. They both work. If you have an easy way to have them uncover the map as they go, I think that's a lot of fun. But I do also think there is something to be said for giving the players that immediate like thing to latch onto with the map. Any potential myths that ended up as seers or vice versa? No, I don't think so, because there are some creatures in the myths that kind of are a little bit like seers, I guess, in that they're weird alien creatures. But no, generally the seers kind of started as they were. Right, I'm going to speed on because I've noticed we're now at the half-hour point, and we are not halfway through. The wolf pack, are these the ones? Yeah, these are the ones that have names. So there's 4 wolves. No, there's the leader, One Ear, and then there's the 4 lesser wolves who have their own names. The glutton crow, his alternative name being Fatteth Roly Bird. I don't remember where it came from, but I like it a lot. Cannot eat grain or fruit. I love a crow that can't eat grain or fruit. That's good. And yeah, the pack is a fun one if you want to deal with a horrible pack of wolves. The Eye is another one of these like event ones where it's kind of based around kind of like a bit of a culty kind of thing happening. But I tried to make it more than just like an evil cult coming through. So it's kind of left a little bit more open for you. The Blade. I rejected the name The Sword because it just felt too close to being like Excalibur or The Sword in the Stone. So the Blade has names, Sifrex and Ilglimvent. I tried to make it differently enough to I wanted to make it different to like Excalibur without without missing out on the opportunity to have some elements of that story in there. So yes, it's a very powerful blade, and it's just incredibly powerful, because I do like that in the Arthurian stories there's different versions of Excalibur and like what it can do, but generally it is this like super powerful thing. So it's always interesting when it becomes like a plot point. So here it comes with a cost, but it is incredibly powerful, and it will utterly destroy anything that it wounds. And also there's Grandad Louse, Roly Rumple, Rockbug. I can't quite remember how he fits in. And some past wielders of the blade and their tragic end. The Legion. Now this started as my take on. So this is a whole separate video that I'm not going to do tonight. There's been lots and lots and lots of debates on how to use orcs in a fantasy setting, and the version of orcs that I always really liked was that like Uruk-hai version of like they represent almost like the military industrial complex of the fantasy world, in that they are like their existence is kind of tied to war. It was like my kind of read of like the Uruk-hai, I guess. And the Legion came out of that, where I was like, well, what if I wanted to have this kind of Uruk-hai style, like these creatures that are kind of dragged out of the mud for war? But here they are more kind of nuanced, I guess, and a bit more kind of tragic. And yeah, they have no purpose beyond war, but they have a fear of death. Their wounds their blades cause wounds that don't heal. And yeah, they're kind of I don't want to say my take on orcs, but orcs was kind of the starting point for this. The imp is cool, and again, I'm not going to zoom in on many of these pieces, but let's go in on the imp, because I feel like even though he's wearing a helmet, I can like see the expression. I like the blank expression on this knight as he's having dinner with a bunch of, are they foxes, I think, and the imp and some bats. In Scaldrine Thrall we must endure, neath smoldent flame chained evermore. So yeah, foxes of the Imp's Court, bats, again, pulling on kind of like animals associated with like devils. And yeah, this one's a lot of fun. He's kind of like the goblin in that he's just a weird character for you to deal with. It's not necessarily about killing him. And he has some good pranks. Turning food into fatty grease, turning an heirloom into vinegar-soaked rags. It's good impy banter. The Troll. So again, the Troll was one of the first ones that I wrote when I was, and it's one of the more kind of like straightforward like fantasy takes, because it was very early in the process when I was thinking about, well, what about a setting where there's just one of each creature? So what if the Troll, you take the sort of the regenerating Troll and sort of take it to its logical conclusion, which is, if this creature is constantly being kind of killed and chopped apart and regrowing, how would it change over that time, and what would this creature kind of want? So yeah, the troll loves their pet chameleon. I can't remember where that's from. That is a reference to something that I read somewhere. The demon. So this is more about like the demon. It's the writher within, I guess. So rather than like fighting a demon, it's more about a demon kind of possessing somebody, which is a lot of fun. The Sea. So the Sea is one of those. Okay, spoilers for the Sea. This is your spoiler warning for the Sea. The Sea, I think, is one of those ones where, yeah, the final omen, if you let it happen, it kind of the sea washes over the whole realm. And very little can survive. After the devastation of the sea is quelled, the sea is quelled and returns to its rightful place. So it kind of like destroys the realm. And that might seem extreme. There are ways to deal with it. Like there is a very obvious way in here to like control the sea if you kind of get the right information and you deal with it. But you might think, well, is it too much for the sea to like destroy the realm? But you are living in the mythic age. You are not living on just Tuesday. Like these are the times that are going to go into the stories. So if you're going to have the big kind of biblical flood style thing, it's probably going to happen in your lifetime because you are mythic knights and these are the mythic times. So I did want to lean into like things that have a big impact rather than kind of pulling my punches. And it does vary from myth to myth, but the sea is certainly one of the more drastic ones. The elf. So again, this one was quite early on. Like, what if there was just one elf? And I cheat a little bit because the elf has some human helpers, or at least like human-like helpers. And the elf has some cool things in that they are different depending on the season. And they just want to flaunt their power. Well, don't we all? And they have some quirks. Yeah, I do like the elf. The elf is kind of tapping into a lot of that kind of the weird like fairy tale, like the weird fae elements where they often have like weird rules that they have to follow. So maybe the elf and their kin cannot harm plants or cannot step indoors, but they absolutely must extinguish fires or they must scare children. They must punish the ugly. So learning this again, the idea is you should be like learning these things from the seer that are going to help you with the myth. So those are a lot of fun. The axe is kind of a contrast to the blade in that it's kind of is this the one that's going like designed to, yeah, it's got quite a climactic ending that I won't go into, but it's kind of a contrast to the blade, in that this is related to the axe wanting to like kill all knights basically. And yeah, and sometimes the little spark table is just something as straightforward as what noise does the axe make when you use it. So its arcing sound might be tearing, and its strike sound could be a bell toll. Right, what number are we on? Right, this is the pace we need to do. So the dwarf again is like an arms dealer essentially, and the dwarf is like providing people with like weird weapons. But again, I wanted this to be so the implication from the poem, for first story, for first seer, the time that came for time. One smith, one hammer, rock, then hill, then word in craft divine. Sorry, world. I can't read this typeface under pressure. So the implication is kind of like the dwarf created the world, and that was kind of what I was going for here. Just an implication. The tower. Which one's the tower? I don't remember this. I remember, yeah, it's about building the tower. Okay, so again, you have a contrast of like how mundane things are, and there's a bit of a like the Tower of Babel, obviously, kind of allusions here. I like the great beast of burden. It's called the Wazzletard, and it longs for human approval. Again, don't we all? So we're on to a new section. I will glance for any questions. Apologies, I'm not going to look all the way back. Do you have any tips on writing omens for myths? Yours have so much flavor and detail to them in such a limited text. It pains me to read this flattery. Please don't. It feels daunting to try and emulate that even for your private use. It's not. Come on, listen. You can't think that way. I think you've just got to do it. And I in terms of advice, the sort of the mantra that I had written on my notes for this book, next to each of the for omens, I had my little 3-word. This bit's kind of gross, so bear with me. I had like a 3-word guide, which was, what was it? It was sticky, chewy. No, it was. Does anyone remember me talking about this? It was like sticky, chewy, crunchy, or something. I can't remember what it wasn't a great list because it's fallen straight out of my brain. A good encounter should be sticky in the sense, or rather, a good omen should be sticky in the sense that it's hard to ignore. It should be crunchy in that there is not one obvious solution to it. If it's just like an automatic, well, we do the obvious thing, then it's not that interesting. And chewy, was it chewy? About having like long-term consequences. I will dig this out, and I will try and post it in the Discord or on Blue Sky. But just think of them like mini encounters and try and make it so they can't be ignored. They don't have an obvious, they don't have like one obvious solution, and they have like a lasting impact that that kind of sticks around and kind of will inform the future. And you don't need to do all three for every single omen, but just keep them in mind. Try and do one or two or three of those things. The chariot's great. So some of these are pulled pretty. In terms of the names are obvious, like tarot illusions. The chariot, again, it's great because he's a real character. And I love his meteor rod that if he wounds someone, it throws them d6 hexes, taking d6 further damage. And it's kind of funny that you only take d6 damage from being thrown that far, because again, it's kind of mythical. So I didn't want it to be like, well, you've been thrown that far, you clearly die. But I just think it's a lot of fun in a hex crawly game to have players get thrown several hexes away. And he wants to avenge any slights against himself or anybody he takes a liking to. Yeah, so he will defend, if he likes you, he'll defend your honor by avenging any slights against you. And again, the tigers have a hatred of horses and fear of mirrors, which I'm sure is from like this bestiary. We'll come back to that with the lion because there's a very obvious one there. Oh, and he has some boasts. So what did he do? He dug out the sea. He rendered the trees motionless. And what's the slight? They disgust me. So he hates trees because he's the one that rooted the trees in place, and they're disgusting. The desert. This is the one. There is a nod to Into the Odd. I think we talked about the Bone Magnate ability for the Bone Knight last week as being an actual like nod to Into the Odd. Here you have the Dust Hag, which is from the very first sort of draft of Into the Odd, the Dust Hag was like an example creature, and you can see she's exiled from tomorrow because she's from Into the Odd, which is after this, I guess. And because she's a hag, she is not a seer, and she doesn't like being mistaken for a seer. And she has some whims. The mountain. So this is a cool one because you can just have the mountain kind of appears on the horizon, and then you can see it, which is always a cool little effect to put in there. The star. So one of the more straightforward allusions to like space and aliens, I guess, in this world. You got these walking towers, which, here they do look very much like walking towers, but you could also kind of interpret them as like Martian fighting machines, maybe from like War of the Worlds. The sun. Again, it's a good one because again, slight spoilers for the sun. He does turn out to be a bit of a monster, but he's not like, you don't really want to like kill the sun in the form of the feaster necessarily. He's not like evil. He's just a bit of a problem. The moon is like it's a fun one because it's kind of a monster mash. It's just like three weird spooky monsters getting thrown into one myth. So you've got the claw, the black lobster of the wood, the bone breaker, brawn and no brain, and the bloodsucker, a wolf that walks on foot, the queen of all hungers. So she's kind of a vampire. This guy's kind of a Frankenstein's monster-ish kind of guy. And this thing is kind of like a creature from the Black Lagoon-ish kind of vibe. And they all have something they want, and they all have like something they're repelled by. So just a nice classic, like here are some weird monsters with some weaknesses. The lion. So this is the one that I remember coming from the bestiary. Hates the sound of wheels and terrified by fire. That is just taken like word for word from the bestiary that I pointed out before. And a lot of the like weird animal quirks in these bestiaries, it's tied back to like Christianity because it was written by some monk, and it's usually there to like make some kind of moral point about like, oh well, lions are like this because it's like in the Bible where this thing happened. But this one doesn't get explained. It just says it hates the sound of wheels, and I found that really funny. And yet it kind of made sense because I'm like, well, a wheel is kind of like the symbol of civilization, and the lion is like the king of nature. So it kind of makes sense that the lion is afraid of wheels, and that's why the Potter is kind of a key character in this because they have the wheel. Oh, infuriating children. This is an interesting table. Annoying children behaviors, like what does your child want, but what will they not do? If you're a parent or you've dealt with small children, I was a teacher for a while, and I certainly pulled on my experience here. So the infuriating child wants something another child has, but they will not use words, or they will not compromise even a bit. The wheel, it's all connected. So this is the lion's bane is the wheel. And this is a fun one because I do like the myths that connect to the kind of the key bits of the game in Mythic Bastionland that I think are interesting. So we have the elf that connects to the seasons, and the seasons are a key part of the game, and the wheel connects to the seasons as well. Does it connect to time in general? No, it's that the wheel is connected to seasons too. So having those two myths together is a really good combination because as the wheel is making the seasons behave strangely, and the elf is like their behavior is affected by the seasons, so that they make a really fun combination. The cudgel is the third of our like weapons, I guess, and this one is a good one because I ended up like putting a kind of griffin in here. Are they called a griffin? What are they called? A hawkleon, the cat of the skies. And yeah, it's kind of like a monster that is apparently not good enough to get their own myth. They're just put in this myth for the cudgel. And the schemes of the hedgehog, possibly my favorite title for a table in this book. Why is the hedgehog scheming? I don't remember. Hog-sized, always on a scheme, see below. Its spines can be made into a dozen arrows, which strike silently, then vanish. The scheming hedgehog tracks the knights, hoping to steal the cudgel for itself, so the hedgehog wants the cudgel. But it also has a scheme. The hedgehog wants to acquire a better home, and its twist is it's playing the long game. Or it wants to expand its dynasty, and it's going to exploit superstitions to do so. So this the scheming hedgehog, and again, that's for sure out of a bestiary somewhere. The lizard. So that there, you will notice there is no dragon in this book, and the idea behind that was I wanted the dragon to be kind of an exception to that rule of saying, well, there's only one of each creature. And I thought, well, if I was going to have one exception to that, then having all the different types of dragon could be a fun twist on that. So the lizard is sort of one version of a dragon that you will find in certain versions of like myths, including dragons. So again, each of these elements is pulled from somewhere. It has scales of uncolor, and it's just horrible. This lizard, it's a real pain to deal with. And yeah, this one kind of represents like a dragon is seen as like a kind of an omen of like the end of days, and that this lizard kind of represents that. The ogre. So this one, bear with me. This one was one of the myths that I pulled more like specifically from one of these Enchanted World books, there is a story in here that is like the story of the ogre. And I didn't want to do this for all of them, but I thought, well, for this one, can I see if I can make this work as a taking a story that is, I don't know, it's maybe 10 pages long in here, and can I turn it into a 6-part myth for the game? And I actually think this one turned out as one of the better ones. It turns out it's better when I steal other people's ideas. So I haven't done it like word for word, and I don't think the crocodile is in there. I think the crocodile is some other animal, but I changed it to a crocodile, I think. And then I sort of layered some things on top in terms of the ogre's behavior. But the core structure of this is taken from a telling of a story about an ogre. And if you are thinking making your own myths, that's a really good place to start. Pick a sort of a fairy tale or a story that you know pretty well, and just think, if I was going to break this down into 6 like events, how would I do that? The spider. This is a cool one, and I do really like this piece of art, because this was used as a placeholder for the knighthood page at the very start of the book, and then we replaced it with a bespoke piece. But I kind of missed this because I think this is a good... It's quite fun having this be the first version of a knight that the players see. The coven, I like these guys. Again, covens of witches are always fun. So these are kind of... I think way back I did a D&D monster tier list video, which took a very long time. But one of the things I realized in there is that hags are a lot of fun as monsters. So these are kind of like my version of like the 3 types of hag in D&D. The Lich, again, another one that has quite big kind of earth-shaking consequences if you don't deal with it. But again, I like that. And yeah, I like the Lich coming back in like slightly more material form each time. The Wight. So when I wrote these out, I did put some similar words together. So you'll notice we're going Lich, Wight, and then I think Wraith might be next. And later on, we've got like, I think we've got like Sprite and is it Pixie or Fairy or some other type of like fairy creature next to each other. And that was kind of to push me to really dig into these specific things that are quite similarly related, but like what makes a Wight different to a Lich or a Wraith. So when I think of a Wight, I think of like, oh, well, they were some kind of fighter. And again, there's different versions of this myth, but so we ended up with the Wight being the knight who defeated death, which is pretty cool. The Spectre, that's right. So it's not the Wraith yet. So this one's quite horrible and depressing, actually, which some of them are. Enraged by reminders of her failures, repelled by reminders of her success. Yeah, try not to read into this too much. The Wraith, again, I like myths that interact directly with the seers. And the Wraith is out there hunting seers, which is a lot of fun. In fact, we'll come back to that thought. But my point is, there are some myths that I think are really good first myths to have in your game. And there are some myths that work, they're designed that they should all work okay straight off. But some of them work better if your players have been around a little bit in the realm. And this one's really good if you've got players who have existing relationships with the seers. Because if you arrive in a realm and you hear, oh, the Wraith is out hunting seers, and you don't know the seers yet, then it's like, well, you know, we'll try and fix this because we're supposed to honor the seers. But if the players have relationships with those seers already, and they know that they love one of the seers is like, great, but one of the seers is a real prick, then when they find out the Wraith is hunting seers, they might be like, well, which seer is the Wraith headed towards next? And we'll decide how important that is. The Beast is... I've used this one a couple of times, and again, it's a nice immediate one for a one-shot. It's fun. The Judge. I think this is another one that works well if you've been around the realm for a while. It does work as the first one, but I think it's good with established characters because it can dig into the characters a little bit more, and it's useful if they've been around a bit. The Crown. Again, this one causes a bit of drama. The Boar. So even ones that have that, there are a lot that are along the theme of like, here is some kind of monster that's causing a problem and you should go out and look for it. How the realm is responding to the creature is sort of what makes them different. So the boar is already being hunted, and then you have a bit of the hunters go through a little bit of an arc in the myth as well. What number are we on? 410. We're doing all right. We're doing okay. The Eagle, great piece of art. Another one that kind of has a few different forms as they kind of re-emerge. The Bat. I won't spoil this one because this one is, I think, an interesting one, but this one is another kind of twist on that idea of just a monster that needs to be killed. And this whole one is kind of a little bit of an investigation into that. So the crimes of the bat. What did the bat do? It shortened spring. What's the proof? A dubious confession. Well, it's self-evident. Yeah. Meanwhile, the toad is pretty bad. Well, I don't know. Is he that bad? I don't remember. It was a long time since I wrote it. People were worried about, people who were worried about spoilers. I could probably play in a Mythic Bastionland game with a lot of these myths, and I won't remember what's going to happen. So don't worry too much about learning them all. Okay, we're on a new section. I'm going to quickly glance for questions. Radak says, late to the party, is that a Sea Area video game shirt? Yes, it is. I'm only wearing t-shirts from defunct video game publishers. Yeah, the Toad is an all-star. Yeah, the Toad is, I guess he's to be respected in his own way. Okay, we're good. We're clear. Let's go. Wait, no, the Colossus. People would have been angry because people really like the Colossus. I think for the piece of art especially, this is really cool. And again, it's an interesting one because it's a monster that you could just fight this thing, but there's lots of other ways that this myth could go. The Fortress. Yeah, so I always forget which one this is because even though it's called the Fortress, it's kind of like, it's really about the Thorn Seer. So yeah, it's interesting because it's a myth where the seer is like the main character, I guess, of this myth. And the Citadel is kind of like a twist on that, I guess, where again you got a place and you've got this character who is not a seer, the Watcher in the Citadel, and they are kind of the main sort of antagonist of this myth. The Catacomb. I was playing in this one quite recently, actually, with some players, and it did get a little bit silly. The fact that you've got the Boneborn, Bones at Arms, and then the Bone Slayer is the upholder of bone law, and he has Bone Helm, Bone Plate, and Hardened Bones, and he has his Bone Breaker, which is his weapon. It is a little bit silly. And again, it depends on like the tone of your game, but I think having this one, it definitely created a very specific feel. But I did like all the thing with the creepy trees, and all the build up was nice and spooky. But I worry that I diminished some of the tension by getting trapped in the bone zone and dealing with that. The Hound. Which one's the Hound? Oh yeah, the Hound. We had this myth in the same game as well, and they ended up resolving it. The Hound's a lot of fun because it's kind of like a curse on some of the players, on some of the knights, and it's really fun dealing with what happens to them. The Glade. Now, this is one that came up in again in a Discord server, as this is pretty much the prime example of one that I don't think I would use in the first game, because it does rely on, or rather, I think this one does kind of rely on you knowing some stuff about the realm. Um, and it can be tricky if you encounter too many omens from this before you've kind of got to grips with the politics of the realm. It's kind of a missed opportunity, because it deals with you're basically calling in favors from these supernatural entities to like mess with the realm a little bit, and it's much more fun doing that when you know who's around in the realm. The tournament, another like event one with like clockwork knights. The bull, so rather than the bull being the monster here, the bull is kind of just the inciting event, I guess, of this myth. The Hydra, I love this piece of art, and this kind of interpretation of the Hydra up here. The Hydra is the punishment for past sins, and it cannot be harmed, heals any wounds, sometimes feigns weakness to trick attackers into thinking they have a chance. And it just doesn't have any weaknesses. And this was kind of deliberately put here to be a monster that you can't really fight. You have to just kind of endure it. And it's kind of best to just get its omens out of the way and endure what it needs to do, and then it will sort of take care of itself. So yeah, there's something in that. Yeah, the spire is like some cool weird mushroom stuff going on. And you know what? I saw this and I'm not happy. Let me take a sip. So in general, I've tried to avoid using the same word for a knight, myth, or seer. So if we have the reliquary knight, I would not want to have the reliquary seer or a myth that's called the reliquary. I want to have each word be unique. And I did check these, but unfortunately the fungal knight here did slip in, and there is a fungal seer. Unfortunately, fungal is just a very cool word. So this is it's tricky because he's not, I guess the fungal knight is kind of a special case because they're part of a myth. But I don't like that I reused the word. So I'm not going to rush out a second edition just to fix that, but that did bug me. The sprite, so again, I mentioned about like weird fairy tale creatures that act in strange ways, and the thing here that I stole, I didn't actually steal it entirely. There's a line in Neverland by Andrew Kolb, the sort of the Hexcrawl book, set in Neverland from Peter Pan. In the description of, I can't remember if it's all fairies or just Tinkerbell, it says that they feel one emotion at a time very intensely. And that was like such a cool little prompt that immediately made me get how I would portray that creature in a game. Because, you can imagine what it would be like if you could only feel one intense, we've all felt lesser versions of that, where one intense emotion is like blocking out the others. But if your entire life was like that, how would you act? And that's a fun way to think about fairies. So here, with the sprite, I had that she feels an intense love for one thing at a time before forgetting them entirely. And just wants to interfere with the way things should be. So she's just a bit of a troublemaker, really. The Hole. Do I reveal the stupid inspiration for this one? So it's a hole underground, and inside the hole there are three types of being that live down in the hole. There are the hole folk, the little ones of the hole. They're good at hiding and they have no desire to fight. They just want to go and explore and have a good time. And one of them is like a small blue hole folk here. Okay, the other type of people that live down here are the Ardrites. If someone says it in chat, I will reveal it. Otherwise, I'm not going to give it away. The Ardrites are the Jade Architects. So they wear green and they bang things with their hammer, and they confuse natural objects together with a strong adhesive, and they just want everyone to do their job and work. So yeah, you've got these little guys that just want to have fun. You've got these little guys that want to build, and then you've got Bearer Boar, who's the deposed king of beasts, and he wants to be respected or feared, and he's like kind of a pathetic big giant. He used to be the king of beasts, so he's like a big guy, and they're all coming out of this hole, and then at the end they go back in and they seal it up. I will let chat ponder on that one, and if I see it, oh, Bury and Beyond says Fraggle Rock. Yes, this is it's not intended to be like play it like Fraggle Rock, but I used Fraggle Rock's the socio-political landscape of Fraggle Rock. I used as the kind of these three like species that kind of have a kind of weirdly symbiotic relationship, and having them come out of the hole. There we go. I'm glad someone got it. The Mist. The Mist is a fun one as well, and it does. I like that it even when its omens aren't happening, it affects the realm. So the mist will stick around even when an omen of the mist isn't happening, and I like myths that do that because it encourages you then to go out and deal with it. So you're incentivized to go and find the source of the mist and deal with it so it goes away. The Gargoyle. I don't remember what the Gargoyle's deal is. Yeah, the Gargoyle is just kind of doing their own business. He lies quite a bit. Well-read and ill-tempered. Yeah, he's just kind of a guy. This one isn't super climactic. He's just got his own little agenda. And when you've got 6 myths happening at once, sometimes it's fine for one to just be like a character that's interesting to deal with. Filippo Pirani says, I'm falling for this game. Do you think the weird old English and the poems can be translated into other languages, Italian, for example? Well, I guess, but then there are a lot of words in here that I just made up. This one I think is like all English, so that's good. But in a lot of them, I just made up words. Bountilush, Verdi. Obviously, it's kind of like verdant, but there's a lot of words just kind of made up in here. Yeah, like this kind of thing. A grimed air, a dims the gleam, a realm is lost in fearful dream. That I think you could translate it, but I think I would probably just encourage whoever's translating it to make up their own in the language that they know, you know. So the Inferno, this is kind of so I said about not wanting to just have like the dragon and having like a few different types. So the Wyvern kind of represents the kind of poisonous dragon. The lizard is the kind of crawling around on the ground dragon, and the Inferno is like the red serpent here. It's called Gwivregul. And if you want just one that feels like a dragon, this is a good solid dragon myth. The Harp. So again, based around a sort of magical item of sorts that is not especially. I mean, it is useful, but it comes with its own problems. The Tree. So yeah, weird things falling down from above, and you get raiders from the clouds, which are kind of like allusions to like Vikings, I guess. But rather than being like raiders from the north, they're from the up. They're from vertically up rather than geographically up. And then it does get weird after that. It's not just people coming down. The Pool. I spent a lot of time in my university days playing Add-on, Ancient Domains of Mystery, which was like a NetHack kind of clone. That's unfair. It was a NetHack inspired game, but I actually preferred Add-on to NetHack. And one of my favorite things in that game was drinking from the pools. You'd be in this random dungeon and you'd find pools, and I would always drink them dry because you get like a random effect every time you drank from the pool. And usually you'd get like some good stuff, and then on your last sip of the pool, you'd get some terrible thing like you're permanently blinded, so you just can't see your character on the screen anymore. And yeah, this is a little bit inspired by that. The pool will give you some blessings and some curses. The elephant. So again, we've got like a knight as the kind of main character of this one, the elephant knight. The snail, is this snail is like a frustrating one to deal with, right? Yeah, the snail feels responsible for maintaining the structure of time across all reality, but doesn't know how to do it. And he covers it with smug overconfidence. So the snail kind of tries to help out, but doesn't really know what he's doing, but feels deeply responsible. The cave. I don't remember what's in the cave. Oh yeah, the cave kind of appears, and this one, it's another one of those geographical ones where the location of the cave is inconsistent, but here that's kind of made into the point. Like the cave will like find you wherever you are. The apparatus. So I'd mentioned in a previous stream that there are lots of thematic tie-ins with Electric Bastionland, and it's arguably the same world depending on how you interpret it, whether that's in time or distance, or like this is a fiction within the world of Electric Bastionland. And the connections are to like the main types of being in Electric Bastionland outside of humans are there are mockeries, which are like your Muppets, so that there is a mock knight in this game. And you could argue that the ones in the hole, but that those things that were inspired by Fraggles are not sort of especially Muppety in this version. But the mock knight is certainly a nod to mockeries. Aliens are in Electric Bastionland, and they're kind of linked with the seers in this game. And the other type of being in Electric Bastionland that's in there is machines. And machines are what they sound like. They're kind of like big computers, essentially, but not quite that straightforward. And the apparatus was my kind of nod to, well, is this like the origin story of machines in Electric Bastionland? And you've got the learned numerator, and what he's doing, trying to build this machine that is potentially the origin of that type of being in Electric Bastionland. And finally, the rock. Welcome to the rock. So amid the waves, a stony throne where ancient warlords sleep alone. This is a more kind of overt Arthurian thing in that there is a place near me I live in Manchester in the UK, and in south of Manchester in Cheshire, there's a place called Alderley Edge, which has a place called The Edge, which is like a cliff, and it's one of the I think there are multiple places that claim this, but they claim that this is where like King Arthur and his knights are sleeping safely underground in some cave, and they will come back when Britain has its time of need. Now, I'm not saying we've had lots of times of need, but I think if they haven't come back by now, I'm starting to doubt that they're coming back. I think we've had a few close calls. And this is a little bit like that in that it's kind of like it's a place where the old warriors kind of go, and they can kind of come back when they're needed. So this is kind of a nod to that. And that is, oh no, wait, it's not. That is the last myth I'm going to be talking about, because the city quest it behaves a bit like a myth, and it's kind of the version of the Grail. I don't want to say it's a version of the Grail quest, but it's the closest to the Grail quest that we have in this version. And it behaves a bit like a myth, a bit not. I don't want to spoil anything because I think it's fun to discover this on its own. But this is like a mega myth, basically. And you have some very definite tie-ins to Electric Bastionland in this piece of art. I won't go over them all in detail, but just, look at some of these characters and look at your copy of Electric Bastionland and even some of these pieces of artwork, and think about how that all connects together. It's a lot of fun. So we are done with myths. which means I shouldn't press that yet. There we go. Which means next week is going to be the final part of the deep dive, where I will talk a little bit about the Apocrypha section. I won't, hopefully a bit of a shorter stream. I think I will have that one double as kind of a Q&A, I guess, where I will try and keep a closer look on the I'm glad someone got my Sean Connery impression. Thank you very much. But I will next week. I will go through the Apocrypha in like broad strokes and maybe do a bit of a Q&A and just kind of close up my thoughts on the game and how I feel about it. But thank you for sticking with me through all these myths. I have a little bit of bookkeeping to do. I've done my promoting for the Any Awards earlier that Mythic Bastion has been nominated for. The second thing I'm going to mention is on Tuesday this week. So Tuesday I'm going to say 15th. No, it's Tuesday today. It's next week. Tuesday the 15th, next week. I have a new game launching on BackerKit. It is very different to Mythic Bastion. It is not connected at all. It is a miniature game. And I thought I would take this opportunity to throw a trailer at you, and then I will come back and sign off. But it's goodbye for now, and enjoy this little peek at what's coming next.
Today, humanity fleet completes its voyage. Our grandchildren will celebrate this moment when we strode into our future as one.
Scouts report more factions wintering from First Landing. Guess they're trying their luck on other worlds.
Oh, how they begged for our mobile armor colossus. Cry for those that perish, but we shall thrive in the age of the map.
So Mac Attack is my miniatures game that is coming to BackerKit next week. If you go to bastionland.com and click on Mac Attack in the sidebar, you'll see a place where a link where you can follow along with the BackerKit. There is a how to play video on there if you want to learn how to play. There are quick start rules that covers everything you need to play, and this tells you everything you need to know about it. It's a miniature mech game. I'm really happy with how it's turned out. It's basically done. All of the artwork is by Amanda Lee Frank, and all of the writing and artwork is done. It's just a BackerKit to fund the print run and get it out to people. And it's going to be a nice small little A5 book, and that is going to be launching next Tuesday. So I thought I would take this opportunity to show some rarely seen business brain from myself. So that is everything for now. Thank you again for tuning in, and I will be doing the final part of this deep dive next week. So until then, it's goodbye for now.